Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and we return to the Marvel series in 1980 for the second Star Wars film comic adaptation. I'm your host, as always, Nathan P. Butler. This time what we're taking a look at is issues 39 through 44 of the Marvel Comics series. Now, you may recall that back in issues 1 through 6 of the Marvel series, we had a 6-issue adaptation of A New Hope. It was not an original story, just a comic adaptation, in that case by Roy Thomas. Now, we've moved on past Roy Thomas's tenure on the series, and most of the issues are being written by Archie Goodwin, mostly with art by Carmine Infantino. Now, you may know Al Williamson because in the near future, he's going to write for the Star Wars newspaper strips along with artist Al Williamson. That dynamic duo is probably the best known pairing from the comic strips. Not the comic books, but the comic strips. Well, this time what we get is an oddity in the process of the Marvel series in that we have Archie Goodwin still writing, this time as an adaptation, but also we have Al Williamson, who's going to work with him on the strips, as the artist of this series, of this brief 6-issue adaptation, the same size as with A New Hope, 2 issues larger than the adaptation of Return of the Jedi will eventually be later within this series. We start out with issue number 39, sometimes simply called The Empire Strikes Back, sometimes called Beginning or Beginnings, but there is no title for the issue itself within the issue. Issue 39, and you may recall, if you've seen this in the pages of the Omnibuy, this part is now just basically one long color band because it's talking about a Marvel comic. Just like they remove the Marvel Comics group stuff out of it when it's reprinted by Dark Horse, they do the same thing to this part, as we'll see when we check out the omnibus here in a minute that it is from. So issue 39. We also then have issue number 40. Now 39 advertises it here saying, Beginning, the official comics adaptation of the most eagerly awaited space fantasy of all, The Empire Strikes Back. And it's very eagerly awaited in this series, you may recall, because 2 issues ago it said, next issue, The Empire Strikes Back. Only it wasn't. That was in Mortal Kombat. Instead, they had that filler issue in between, Riders in the Void. Now it's finally The Empire Strikes Back. The second issue says, continuing the official comics adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, Battleground Hoth. And yes, this issue is entitled Battleground Hoth. We then have issue 41, continuing the official comics adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, Imperial Pursuit. And yes, once again, that's the title, Imperial Pursuit. Not to be confused, of course, with the video game of the same name. We then have issue number 42, continuing the official comics adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, and now, The Bounty Hunters. This particular issue, though, not entitled Bounty Hunters, is entitled To Be a Jedi. We then have issue number 43 here, continuing the official comic adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, same little logo that's been on all the other ones, Betrayal at Bespin. Followed, of course, by the final issue of the adaptation that says something at least a little bit different. At last, the incredible conclusion of the official comics adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back. Duel a Dark Lord. And that basically is just like all kinds of different colors back there. There's nothing special about the cover. It's not holographic. It's not something with like the metallic type of look to it or anything like that. This isn't the 90s, folks. They're not doing all the gimmicks. It just looks a little odd coming out from the clash of the lightsabers here. Nothing gimmicky about the cover. It's just a little freaky looking. We can, of course, find this in the same omnibus we've been in for a while. Star Wars Omnibus a long time ago, Volume 2. And as I mentioned, when you look at the cover of some of those being reprinted, see that whole contest thing is absent from the top there, just like you would expect. Now, what's probably most interesting about this is the same thing that's usually most interesting in any adaptation. What scenes have been added, which usually isn't adding them, so much as the film cut them and they still wound up in the adaptation because of when it was being produced in relation to the film being edited. You basically get all the major Empire Strikes Back cut scenes, so to speak, in here, or deleted scenes in here. Same ones you'll find on the Blu-ray, for example. You get the segment of Luke, after being attacked by the Wampa, having that weird facial mask kind of thing going on here. You get the instances of the people at the Rebel base having to fight up there in that top panel against the Wampa Ice Beast. It's not a huge part of it, but it is something that is played out here like it would have been played out in the film at one point. Basically, all those little bits and pieces. You get some extended dialogue, for instance, also between Darth Vader and the Bounty Hunters whenever he's talking to Boba Fett here. right? So whether it's the original voice or it's Tamira Morrison, we've got some talking Boba Fett where he says, Vader says, "There will be a substantial reward for the one who finds the Millennium Falcon. You and your band are highly regarded in your particular trade, Boba Fett. Do not disappoint me." Interesting how it sounds as though he's saying that all these guys work for Boba Fett. Bosk and Forlom and all them. Yeah, not so much, at least not in the continuity. Boba Fett answers, "Given a free hand, I've never disappointed anyone except those who hope to escape me." Ooh, talking big. To which Vader replies that you are free to use any method necessary, but I want proof. No disintegrations. To which rather than saying simply, "as you wish," again in one voice or the other, we get him saying, "Understood. Now about the reward. Just how substantial will it..." Then he's interrupted as they come in saying, "My lord, we have them." And then they're going after the Millennium Falcon. So a little bit different dialogue there. We see some different slight montage type stuff with Luke training and whatnot. I mean, pretty much all those major differences are there. There are two that probably stand out as the most glaring for those who have watched the film over and over again and can almost hear it in their head as they're reading. But they're both things that are of note here from a pop cultural standpoint. For instance, and this might be where some of the pop culture confusion comes from other than simple ignorance. I mentioned this back in the novelization video here for From the Star Wars Library. We're familiar with the idea that in pop culture, it's constantly, "Luke, I am your father. Luke, I'm your father. Luke, I'm your daddy. Luke, who's your daddy?" But it's always, "Luke, I am your father," or some variation of it for humorous purposes most of the time. But the film doesn't say Luke. The film has Vader talking to Luke, but he says, "No, I am your father." You can hear it in your head if you're a Star Wars fan. "Luke, I am your father" should grate on your sense of what's right in The Empire Strikes Back if you're hearing somebody say it who doesn't realize that it was "No, I am your father." Especially if a Star Wars fan says it and makes it sound as though they think that's what it said in the movie itself. But I wonder if part of the confusion maybe came from the Marvel adaptation here. If you go back and think about the novelization, I mentioned how the novelization gets it right. "No, I am your father." Here what you get is, "There is no escape, Luke. Don't make me slay you," as opposed to destroy. "Join me. Together we will be more powerful than the Emperor. It was meant to be. There are many things Obi-Wan has kept from you, such as what happened to your father." Then the narration says, "Turning off his laser blade, the Lord of Sith extends his hand." Luke answers, "Ben told me enough. He told me you killed my father." To which Vader says, "No, Luke, I am your father." Or I guess if you want to use their enunciation of it, given the fact that they have emphasis on the word "am," it's more like, "No, Luke, I am your father," instead of "I am your father," which sort of changes a little bit of the drama of what he's saying there. To which, of course, Luke goes into his whole, "No, that can't be, that's impossible," etc., etc. But here, instead of "No, I'm your father," or "Luke, I'm your father," it's "No, Luke, I am your father." It has both. And I wonder if that, because at this point, you don't have much in the way of people having home video players at home nearly as much as you'll see later on. I mean, this is the infancy at this point of, VHS, beta, all that type of stuff, of videotapes. For those of you who are young, that's back whenever you had to actually rewind and wait for it to rewind. You couldn't just skip like on a CD with a DVD or a Blu-ray. I know, it's dark times out there. Before the dark times, before the Empire. Before, I guess, what's the Empire? DVDs, Blu-ray, something like that, before Best Buy. So in any event, what you've got here is a different take on the same scene, and at least it says Luke, so maybe there is some reason for pop culture to say "Luke, I am your father" instead of "No," rather than simple ignorance. My bet is it's mostly simple ignorance, but at least in this case we have something we can point to use as maybe a retcon to say, well, the reason why they keep getting it wrong is because they saw it wrong in the comic book. Yeah. That's the ticket, as the critic might have said. The other big dialogue difference, of course, though, is in Han's ad-libbed line. Remember, it's "I love you, I know," with the "I know" being something that was ad-libbed by Harrison Ford on set. As in the novelization, we get pretty much the same thing it had based on earlier scripts. Leia saying, "Han, oh Han, I love you. I couldn't tell you before, but it's true." At which point he says, "Just remember that, Leia, 'cause I'll be back." Very, Terminator-esque there, I suppose. Han Solo as played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor of California, at one point, before he screwed the maid. Yeah. Anyway, suffice to say, it is a solid adaptation. It reads better than the stuff that we saw with the A New Hope novelization, or comic adaptation, excuse me, but of course, we know what certain characters look like and such, so to judge the A New Hope adaptation against the other adaptations, I think is probably unfair. To judge this one by other adaptations, I think that is much more fair, and they do a pretty good job of it. It is a decent adaptation. If you're going to read a comic of I keep saying A New Hope. If you're going to read a comic adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back, this is the one to read. Of course, for the most part, this is the only one that's out there to read. Now, you might be saying, wait a second, this can't be the only one. These are old Marvel issues here, son. I know I've seen this adaptation. I've seen an adaptation of The Empire Strikes Back by Dark Horse Comics. So how are you going to say that this is the only one? Yeah, see, that's the thing. When Dark Horse Comics got the Star Wars license, they also got the license to reprint a bunch of the old Marvel stuff. And over again, Dark Horse has taken these issues and re-released them as classic Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, as Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back adaptation in different slipcase sets, whether it's special edition or otherwise. Dark Horse never did a new adaptation of it. This is it. What they would simply do is take the first 3 issues, 39 through 41, and stick them in an issue, and take 42 to 44 and put them in an issue, and then release it as a 2-issue series. So, not a whole lot to it. Now, before we end here, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention, because I think this is an interesting point when it comes to comic adaptations, and that is, where do these issues cut off the action and leave us with a cliffhanger setting up the next issue? Whereas, of course, the film gets watched all at once. Remember, people were reading these a month at a time. This is from May to October, I believe it was, of 1980. The first split occurs at the end of issue number 1. This is when they've just destroyed the probe droid and know the Empire is on its way. The second split at the end of issue number 40 takes place whenever Luke is shot down in his snowspeeder, and as the walker is approaching him, he is just now getting out of the snowspeeder, ready to try to confront it on foot. Issue 41 ends with Luke arriving on Dagobah and Yoda seen in shadow. Issue 42 wraps up with the Millennium Falcon leaving the Imperial Star Destroyers behind, followed by Slave One. And the final cliffhanger of this comic adaptation at the end of issue number 43, Han has just been put in carbonite, and we see Luke very briefly as he enters Cloud City, eventually to face Vader. So our question as always, is this an essential read? For people who have seen the film, no, absolutely not, because you've already seen the film. On the other hand, you want to see a pairing of Al Williamson and Archie Goodwin before they got into newspaper strips together? This is kind of a cool thing to check out, and it is always interesting to see how the film deviates from the comic adaptation and vice versa. So in that sense, it might be cool to check out. But certainly if you're reading the omnibus, you can skip it to go straight into the original Marvel stories. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the readers.